Hi everyone, how's it going? My name is Brian Lagunas. This is going to be my video for the research project. The title of it is going to be Traditionalist Views on Gender and Gender Roles and How They Benefit Society. This is for the class CHST 150, Introduction to Chicana and Chicano Studies for Professor Rodrigo Valles. So to start off the video, I wanted to acknowledge the current state of affairs or current cultural climate around the topic. So at the moment, there's currently a culture war surrounding gender and gender roles. Some sides are picking between traditional values of gender, and while other people are picking more progressive ones, which ultimately ditch those traditional set of values. Now, to begin the video or to branch off from what I had just mentioned, I want to list my first citation. It is coming from Jacqueline Scott from the University of Cambridge, who wrote in their article Family and Gender Roles and How Attitudes Are Changing. So, this is from the result of a multi country survey that saw the views of people, specifically the younger generation, on their views on marriage and gender roles. Now, from what they had gathered, they saw an increase in the acceptance of different family types and a difference in the traditional gender roles being more egalitarian or being more equal as opposed to what was set before them. Now, they also noticed an acceptance in divorce and a decline in traditional breadwinner model. Now, before going further, I also want to set an analogy to essentially set the tone of what I view of the traditionalist viewpoint and how it benefits society. So, the way that I see it is the world cannot be built on a foundation that is essentially forever evolving, just like how a building can't be built on a foundation that's forever changing. So, this analogy is to basically say we need to keep what society has kept in line for all these years and not essentially change that train of thought because that's what essentially has gotten us this far. It's not an idea that's embedded in hatred or anything along those lines, or a fear for something different, but it's just more set in place because that's what helps society maintain order all this time. Once again, a foundation just holding a building. And by continuing, I also wanted to essentially state the philosophy of a traditionalist point of view for gender and gender roles. The traditionalist philosophy on gender and gender roles is embedded in the idea that gender is assigned at birth. Men grow into roles as protectors and providers due to physical differences, while women grow to be more nurturers due to their ability for childbearing. This balance basically helps provide the best environment for raising children and providing the best chance for integrating them into society. So, once again, that's the traditionalist philosophy. And the way that I view it is that the traditionalist philosophy on gender and gender roles benefits society altogether. Now, I want to define gender from a traditional perspective as well. So, similar to what was mentioned earlier, gender from a traditionalist point of view is the same as talking about biological sex, male and female. Now, because of physical differences, we grow into different roles as we grow older. Men typically become providers and protectors, and women being more of the nurturing role. And to branch off from gender, I also want to talk about gender roles and how they're more functional as opposed to like being arbitrary, um, or being seen as arbitrary from like a progressive viewpoint. So the gender roles are functional because they have been tested all throughout human history. These roles are not meant as like a form of oppression, but they're more of a frame that's ensured survival and child rearing and social cohesion. With men being more able bodied, it's basically expected for men to work and to provide and protect for their family, while women, because they're able to bear children, it leads itself to fulfilling more of a nurturing role for children. Now, I also want to get into the topic of gender, of observed versus assigned. Now, in a traditionalist viewpoint, like I mentioned earlier, gender is more something that is observed, while in a progressive viewpoint, it's more something that's viewed as assigned. So the origin of gender for most of human history starts at birth from visible, distinct differences in genitalia. The differences are more enhanced as we grow. As I'm sure we've all been through with puberty, we notice a difference in sexual dimorphic traits. So men typically grow stronger with larger amounts of muscle mass, and women's bodies essentially prepare for childbearing. Um, Most of these changes happen because of um, spikes of hormones during puberty. Now, I actually want to cite an article that actually dives into sexual dimorphism and states the differences that we see or the physical differences that we observe. So, the article is called Sexual Dimorphism of Body Composition. It's written by Jonathan C.K. Wells, which reviews scientific information from multiple studies about the physical differences between men and women over their lifetime. So, what they noted is that at birth, men and women start off relatively similar in lean mass and body fat distribution. Now, like mentioned earlier, over time, as puberty takes its course and later stage menopause, changes in the amount of fat and lean muscle mass and bone density vary greatly. Men, most notably, have more lean muscle and larger bone density due to the increase of testosterone during puberty. Women, on the other hand, store more body fat due to the hormone progesterone. Now, all of this is to say is to critique essentially the central idea of progressive viewpoint when it comes to gender and gender roles. So they view gender as more of something as a personal choice, and I think the idea of personal choice in regards to gender is just not grounded in reality. It's basically what it's stated to be, which is a personal choice. And just like most choices for us as individuals, just like how we can choose how we behave or choose what interests we decide to get into, gender, on the other hand, is just one of those things that's just grounded in reality or observable reality. Subjective feelings on gender create basically like an instability when there's no consensus on what gender is or what each gender partake in. We cannot argue, for example, like a man for to bear children like a woman would, or we can't um, expect women to have the same physical output as a man. You know, we see these type of differences when it comes to sports, when it comes to women engaging with men, and like I mentioned, there's even been men in the transgender sphere where they've argued where they wanted to essentially have periods or bear children similar to how women have. But if, once again, these are just not ideas that are grounded in reality. Now, I also want to talk about public reality versus private perception. So what that basically means is like the diff what I see that is going on for the cultural divide is basically is what we're confusing is public reality and private perception. So in society there are basically shared beliefs that we all have to maintain order. Just like how a country has laws and we all abide by, society does the same thing with like common truths. Okay? So if we're using the same example of laws, let's basically just look at personal feelings or private perception of those towards laws, right? You can feel however you like towards a law, but again, we have these common truths which we all must agree upon, which essentially keep us in order. So the cultural war, like I mentioned, is basically confusing the two of public reality versus private perception. So just because you feel one way or the other towards what is agreed upon as law doesn't change the set fact which is set in stone. Okay? Now, aside from personal feelings, I also think it's important to see how subordination helps with like the biological baseline. So like in a traditional sense, these ideas are upheld with each gender, and people can essentially personally choose how they feel towards them. But once again, we ultimately all fit in society by fitting a framework that was laid out before us. So if a man chooses to identify as something other than a man, they can do so personally, but we must follow the duty that has been set before us, which is basically our gender roles to uphold societal expectations. Now, what would happen if we didn't go down that path? Um, so right now, there's currently a lot of pushback against what has been laid out before us. Um, There are people that argue that gender and gender roles are essentially man-made concepts with no inherent value. But if we continue down that route, we'll basically see a lot of disorder and a less ideal environment for childbearing or just to grow children in general. So I think viewing everything from a traditionalist point of view doesn't eliminate the people that we're referring to that don't categorize themselves within male or female, or they feel like they don't align with the traditional gender role that's set for men and women. Now, that doesn't essentially eliminate them from our reality as well, even with having a traditionalist point of view. So, in a traditionalist point of view, I don't think that we would eliminate those type of people who want to identify as another gender, but in order for our society to be healthy and functioning, I don't think we can exclude them either. Um, what we can do as a society, if we were to continue to view things from a traditionalist point of view, is we can essentially extend civic and human tolerance for one another. So we can extend that tolerance while still basically having the baseline of grounded reality and ideas of gender. So it essentially being like accepting of them for who they are and their personal beliefs while still maintaining the same idea or ideals around gender and gender roles. This is going to go into my third citation. Um, it is called The Third Gender and Hijras. So this is an article written by Christopher Rude, and they essentially list the importance of third genders in history. So the concept being of there being a third gender is nothing new. So the concept of people who view themselves in the wrong body or gender has been around for Hindus specifically for more than 2,000 years. Now, the reason why I bring this specific topic up is because people would say from a traditionalist point of view that essentially it's ignoring the reality at hand that there are people that do feel this type of way, which is not the case. These ideas of people not aligning with what has been set in stone has been around for millennia. There's been countless cultures, not even just Hindus, but even cultures such as Samoans who have identified a third gender. Now, in a traditionalist point of view, we wouldn't label them specifically as a third gender. We would just acknowledge their existence, accept them into society because, of course, we're not ignoring a reality that we see before us of people choosing to identify something else, but instead we are accepting them and categorize them as our own thing while them understanding that there is a baseline and reality that we all accept altogether. Okay? Now, the reason why I think traditionalist point of view is very beneficial to society is because these values essentially lay the foundation for the family unit and they provide stability when followed by society as a whole. Children in the traditionalist point of view are provided for and taken care of in all aspects of nurturing and providing. So, as mentioned earlier, the men protect and provide, and the women they nurture, which are all aspects that children need when it comes to growing up in order to um, thrive, right? Now, I want to cite my fourth citation, the article of Who Matters for Children's Early Development, Race, Ethnicity, and Extended Household Structures in the United States. It's written by Stephanie Mulborn and Paula Fomby and Jeff A. Dennis. So they examined the best living situation which works best for children. The best one in their findings being the nuclear family. They show a correlation of academic success and family presence for children. It's a study of over 8,450 children, and they noted an increase in single-parent homes with Black and Latino children and an increase in two-parent households for white children. These differences helped the children with cognitive development, and they also led to extended family homes. Now, one way this can essentially be perceived is due to financial pressures and parental pressures needed for children due to the absence of one parent. So, to essentially summarize that, a lot of these minority or ethnic groups choose to live in more extended families, and as a result, they essentially get what they're missing from a more nuclear family, which is two parents, which not only provide provide for the children, but they also provide nurturing needs as well. Because if it's just a single parent household, then all of that burden essentially falls on one parent. Okay, and it's also going to lead to my fifth citation as well. So this article is referred to as "Are Both Parents Always Better Than One Parent? Parental Conflict and Young Adult Well-Being." This one right here is written by Kelly Music and Anne Muir, and it explores if growing up with two parents is ideal for a child's development. Now, in their findings, they basically see that the relationship of the mother and father is important to a child's development. They analyzed over 1,963 children and found that low conflict homes with both parents provided the best environment for children to grow up in. It resulted in better educational outcomes and less substance abuse and less early sexual activity. Now, basically, both of these articles highlight the importance that both parents play in a child's life and how they lead to behaviors that are essentially more ideal for success. So, in a traditionalist gender role, of course, the men would provide, and it the traditionalist role essentially provides a more cohesive partnership that provides all the needs for children. So when we're essentially sticking to the grounding truths, we see society focus a lot more of the efforts to continue to build what was left behind as opposed to focusing our efforts on ideas on gender roles and defining gender, right? We're more focusing on the future generations as opposed to arguing about arbitrary arguments such as these. Now, once again, like with the traditionalist point of view, we're not advocating for hatred for what is different, but essentially advocating for maintaining and growing the world that we live in. So we're not worshiping a time that was before us, but instead we're just following a system that's proven to continue to grow and essentially give us prosperity. So with everything being stated, I hope it essentially provides food for thought when it comes to the negative stigma that revolves around traditional views on gender and gender roles, as being more of a functional and more intentional. I feel like right now the stigma towards traditionalist point of views, especially coming from progressive viewpoints, views it more as a position that's more lost in the past or a position that's meant to be oppressive towards women. And while maybe that might have been the case for some cultures, I'm looking at this specifically in a way that benefits society. You know, we live in a world now where men and women, for the most part, are on equal footing when it comes to potential earning. And my position here is to argue that the traditionalist point of view essentially provides the most ideal environment for raising children. And of course, when providing the most ideal environment for raising children, we essentially provide an ideal environment that grows society as well, because we're essentially raising the future generation. So I hope everything I said can provide food for thought when it comes to the negative stigma that revolves around traditional views on gender and gender roles. It's more functional, like I mentioned, and it's not closed-minded to like any potential change. It's not trying to say that anything different is better. It's just more or less stating that what was set before us will continue to um, prosper with the future generations. So it's a perception that benefits society by having a clear family unit, specifically the nuclear family, and it has the ideal environment for children to grow in. So, just like I mentioned earlier with the analogy of the building, you know, we're consistently building upon what was laid before us, but in order for us to maintain we must maintain the foundation that has taken us this far. So by consistently changing things, we're essentially changing everything that society has been built upon prior to us. And as you can imagine, that's not going to be beneficial towards our future. Through all of society, we've had these third genders. Some groups have excluded them, some groups have accepted them. And in my point of view, I think we can still accept these groups that choose to be different while still maintaining a an idea of gender and gender roles, which can still benefit society while not ignoring the problems at hand. We want to provide the most ideal environment for children, for them to grow in, and once again, that's going to help society as a whole. So yeah, that's going to be my research project. I Hope everything answers all the questions in regards to how a traditionalist point of view is beneficial to society. And thanks for watching.